Egypt. This time I'm going to take you back into time as I've done before to show how old the concept of the globe is. This time we'll visit a culture that most likely thought the earth was flat. And yet their way of looking at the flat earth is completely different compared to what the Bible followers and flat earthers of today say. They believe that the sun moves above a flat plane. They also claim they are much better in observing than the average scientist is. They observe and what they see tells them the earth is flat. And apparently that the moon and the sun go above it. What is the difference then with the old Egyptians? They probably thought the earth was flat too. Yet their concept of the sun and the moon is completely different. And that's because they were better observers and better critical thinkers. Welcome to my new video, and let me take you along.
Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took.
So people, let's have a first look then at the Egyptians, who probably also believed that there was a flat earth. But there's one big difference with the way it is depicted today by many of the flat earth believers. They show a disk with a sun and a moon hovering above it. But when we look at the old Egyptians and what probably was their flat earth, they did have a certain clearly different idea of how the sun and the moon would move. The gods, Cap and Nut, one was, let's say, the earth, the other the skies above, but they still had their god Ra, the god of the sun, who in a boat would travel through the sky to dive below that flat earth, go underneath and come back on the other side. And this is a clear different approach than a flat earth with a sun and a moon hovering above. So how come they were thinking this and not thinking about a hovering sun? The more north you live, the easier it is to think and that people make you believe that the sun turns around a point in the North Pole and hovers off a flat earth. That's probably what you think you observe. But what happens when you go more and more south? Suddenly it appears much more that the sun is not hovering, but is actually going over your head, especially at equinox or during the equinox at the equator. Then there is no mistake at all that the sun is not hovering, but is going around. And if you think the earth is flat, most likely you'd think exactly what the Egyptians thought. God Ra is moving, coming up from below, going over the sky, going down again to fight off the darkness. And it somehow makes sense, because when you create some form of a sundial, which could be just a simple obelisk, and you bring it south enough, for instance into the area where the Nubians were living, you come closer and closer to the equator, and you will get certain effects of that shade, and certainly during the equinox, that are too obvious, belonging to a sun that moves above and below a flat earth than hovering in a circle above. The hovering sun will have shadows behave in a certain way, and many will have seen YouTube videos of people that put the battery on a disk or on a table or something else, and they play around with a flashlight. Now, probably the Egyptians trying to figure out which way the sun was moving or how it was moving. They could, of course, after observing during the day, during the night, take a torch and some stones piled up, and then see what movement of this torch would cause the shape of that pile of stones to behave in such a way that it matches what they see during the day. And it is very quickly that anybody can see that when you put it all on a table, you hold the torch below the table and you let it come up and go over the pile of stones to when it's straight above. It will not form a shade. And then you keep moving in that direction. And you basically have what they would see the closer they would get to the equator. And therefore, I think that the Egyptians were already much better observers than the present day 2019 flat earth believers. The Egyptians, however, had to solve other problems in their model, but they were not really important, like time zones. As long as your entire empire is all you have and you never travel further and you don't need telecommunication or whatever like we do today, time zones were not important. And that model they had at least explained much better the behavior of the sun and the moon. Another thing that probably would have helped the Egyptians create their model or not get deviated to a model where the sun and moon have to move above a plane, in a plane, was that, well, suppose you're an Egyptian and you see these beautiful sailing boats, the typical Egyptian sailing boats, you see them go over the Nile, which in some parts is quite straight, so you can look for a couple of miles. You will see immediately that boat that just passed you will get very quickly smaller and smaller. And if that is what happens when something is moving away from you, then just looking at the sun and the moon already tell you that they don't change in size. So whatever your model is, somehow that moon and that sun keep some sort of same distance to you on the ground. They don't change size. A model by which, let's say, Egypt is the axle of a wheel on which the sun moves above the flat earth and then below the flat earth, so it's actually perpendicular to your flat earth, that was a model that would allow the sun and the moon to keep the same size. And that also, if you fill that in, if you bring all these data and the things these Egyptians could observe together, then their model is therefore what we now know it is. It's a sun going below the flat earth, coming up in the east, etc. So now today it is thought that most likely the people who wrote the Bible took over part of the model of the Egyptians, that of the flat earth, that of the sun above. Now, the explanation we see now in 2019 by flat earthers is that of a hovering sun above a flat plane, and not as the Egyptians, a sun going above and below the flat earth. That's what they want to make you believe, but if you, for instance, look at Ecclesiastes 1.5 in the King James 5 Bible, it will say, "The sun also arises, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to the place where he arose." And typically going up, arise, and go down is something different than moving away over the horizon and to come back. Yeah? So that part in the Bible looks pretty much the way the Egyptians understood it to happen. And well, you seldom hear flat earth believers talk about this part in the Bible because it is absolutely perpendicular to their model, which they want to make us believe. Summarizing, we could say that the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian religion is much more capable of explaining the movement of the sun than, let's say, the Christian one is. At least the Christian one of the flat earth of believers of today. So nothing shows that a hovering sun could even be true. A flat earth might be true, but then it would have to have a sun in the way that the Egyptians explained, going all the way around above and then below. This can also be tested during the equinox. On the globe model, and let's say the Egyptian model, where you confine yourself to the country of Egypt and don't bother with time zones, you both will have the case that a sun during the equinox exactly rises in the east. reaches its peak at noon in the south or right straight above you, and then it sets exactly in the west. This behavior can be seen everywhere in the world. I was once in Sicilia, and I made a picture of a pyramid they had built there, a small one, which was exactly on the Etna meridian. I didn't know that there was a meridian going straight over the volcano Etna, which is actually the -1 hour meridian, you could say, 1 hour before the sun reaches the Greenwich meridian. And what I saw there, and I only realized it later, years later after I looked at the pictures, was that the picture was taken during the solar solstice. And you can see that the shadow is exactly pointing at the right time, but also on a curve. The curve that is predicted to be where the shadow would go during this summer solstice. If you then look a little bit higher on the same sundial, you see a straight line. That straight line is for during the equinox. Then the point of the gnomon will start on one side and go exactly along this straight line while the sun moves during the equinox over the equator. Now, there is also a paper version of a sundial you can put together, made by Walter Bislin, and you can copy the drawing from his website. And that allows you actually to make a sundial which you then can rotate a little bit in such a way that it is in line with your latitude on the globe. And then the sun will go also in an exactly straight line, and the shadow will go in a straight line in that sundial or over that sundial. Something impossible, absolutely impossible, with a hovering sun over a flat plane. And then you again see that the Egyptians, they at least observed much better and realized that somehow the sun must come from below. And they didn't envision a globe, okay. But what they did was observe what the sun did and how the shadows behaved, and came up with a better model. Now, we could also go to places like Quito, which is in Ecuador, and it's on the equator. And there you will find sundials and very high poles, etc., that will exactly do what we have seen in this little video, where the shadow will stay on a perfect east to west direction. And what is even nicer is you could create a different shape of a special equinox sundial. If you would take two parallel plates and you would put them in a nice east-west direction, then the sun that would rise should, when you're standing on the other side of this special sundial, would rise in between these two plates and stay there up to the moment it reaches noon. And then during noon, you could stand very close to there and see that it hardly gives any shade. We could actually lift the whole sundial off the ground and it would then show only the shade of the plates. That would be an interesting concept, don't you think so? And then the sun would continue on his east-west path, and you could go to the other side of this sundial and see the sun in between the two plates again, go down, down, down until it sets in the west. Such a sundial doesn't leave any imagination or fantasy with regard to the path of the sun. Any deviation of the sun of this straight line would cause the shadow of these two plates to come close to each other and even close the gap. Something that absolutely should happen if the sun was hovering above a flat plane. Then only when the sun comes near or close to these two parallel plates, then it will start shining in between. The only point where the present flat day model and the globe model would be or give the same result would be at noon, because then in both cases the sun shines straight through to the bottom. Straight after that only on the globe model you can explain what this two plate shadow creating sundial would do. It's not just this little model that I show you here. It does exist and it's gigantic, and it's probably the most beautiful proof of a globe that we have. It is the Quito Sol Recto sundial, and it is near the city of Quito, which is near the equator. I'll show you some of these pictures of this gigantic sundial that is hanging in cables, where during the equinox the sun stays in between the two plates that are suspended on cables, and you can actually stand below this gigantic sundial, which then hangs straight above you during noon. And it's amazing. But this thing can only exist, and what we see with this thing is only possible on a globe model. It could have been possible on an Egyptian flat earth model, because that fits as well. Now, before you all start running, oh, the earth is flat, so it must be the it must be the Egyptian model, and okay, we were wrong, forget the Bible, but the Egyptians are right, flat earth, flat earth. The problem with the Egyptian model is, of course, that it doesn't allow for time zone. And the Egyptian model assumes that it is at the same time day for everybody on the flat plane, and it is night for everybody on the flat. And because the Egyptians probably didn't travel that far, they had never detected this little problem in their model. But don't forget, these guys were building pyramids before the first words of the Bible were even written. Their model, at least, is much more interesting with regard to the shadows we see and the interaction with the sun. So I hope I gave you another view of how we could look at the discussion of flat earth and globe, and by comparing a little bit and showing you in all kinds of ways with pictures and videos I made myself and I got from other people, like for instance Wolfie, that the model of the Egyptians, at least from a point of observation, was much better. And it was done 3,000 years ago. Think about that, 3,000 years ago. They already viewed the sun and the moon and said, okay, whatever it is not hovering above, it is going above and beyond, below our Earth. As we have so nicely seen also in the video of Wolfie, where a telescope following the sun will actually show when it is continuing following the sun, it goes underneath. So, globe or flat, doesn't matter, there is no hovering sun nor hovering moon. Possible, it's simply not possible. The last thing we can do is you can have a look at one of my videos, and I will put the link below, where I show you two time lapses of shadow of two objects, one on the northern hemisphere and one on the southern, and where you then also see that the sun is, or the shadow is moving in the opposite direction, something also impossible on a flat earth. I hope you liked this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. I'm always interested in views that are different than what I try to explain here. But please keep it a little bit polite and don't come up with these trolls like, Earth is flat, period. Open your eyes, observe, be a critical thinker, because thinking that the Earth is flat makes you absolutely opposite. It makes you a dumb sheeple that is following God your shepherd. Thanks all. It took a time for me to put on some new video, but it was fun to do. And I noticed that sometimes my sound seems to vibrate a little bit. It's a new studio microphone. It's not exactly behaving the way I had hoped it would do. I will look into that for later videos. For the moment, you have to do with what I've got now. Thanks. Bye bye.